Good evening and welcome to this week's installment of DSQ Digital. I'm Sarah Tuttle, and joining me this evening for a lovely conversation is Ferdinand Liva, one of the violinists of the DaPonte String Quartet. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Not too shabby, all things considered. How are you?
Okay. I was glad to see the sun come out a little bit this afternoon.
Well, I'm glad to have you with me this evening. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about the quartet and how you're kind of finding your way musically in the quarantine and a couple other interesting musical topics. So
Great.
for me, I'm a singer, and when I think DaPonte, I think of Mozart, as DaPonte wrote many different libretti for Mozart. How does that name find its way onto a string quartet?
Well, so there we were in Philadelphia. I had been asked by these three guys, Miles Jordan being one of them, to come over and let's play some quartets together and see what's what. So I'm like, yeah, okay. So I went over there and we got to playing, and after some time we agreed that, okay, we're going to be a quartet. And DaPonte, as you said, Mozart's librettist, was an interesting character. He was along the lines of, a scallywag, really. And he would sort of lie and cheat and his way through Europe, basically, until he got kicked out of everywhere you can think of. And he was Italian and Jewish. And so we were, at that time, 2 Italians and 2 Jews. So we're like, okay, that's good, that fits. And we liked the whole scallywag sort of get out of here before they catch me thing. And so he actually ended up in New York and started what became now the Metropolitan Opera. He was the guy that did that. And he came from Europe because he had to get out or they were going to throw him in prison. Uh-huh. So he stowed away and came to Manhattan. And that he ended up buried in Pennsylvania. He's there in Pennsylvania. We're like, okay, cool story. So we said, yeah, good. And DaPonte, of course, means bridge. And all of our instruments have bridges. So we're like, what else could be better?
Connection. So you guys started in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, right.
How on earth did you find your way to Maine?
Well, we had been playing for a couple of years, coming to Maine every summer because the violist at that time, his name's Mark Preston, he had this idea that this little church in South Bristol called the Union Church would be the place we do concerts in Maine. Mm-hmm. Right? So we would come up to Maine. Our first summer, 1991, we had basically formed that April. We played one performance as a quartet at Penn State University. We only played one piece on a program. It was like last minute kind of thing. Let's add this on. We're now a quartet. Okay. So they had been a trio before. And so we made it into a quartet. And we kept coming to Maine for a bunch of years, and we would do 7 concerts in 7 weeks. All new repertoire, really, what are you thinking kind of thing.
Wow.
It was really it was crazy, but it was a lot of fun. And we rented a house out in the middle of nowhere in the woods, and we basically rehearsed all day and did nothing else, basically.
Sure.
We sailed every once in a while. And so that's how the Maine connection started, coming to Maine every summer. And then we would play those 7 programs up here and take it all back to Philadelphia and play it on Rittenhouse Square. There's a performance space called the Ethical Society. And we would do those concerts at the Ethical Society over the year. And we got some pretty good press and reviews and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, we were still in school. At least I was in school. I think Miles was also still in school then. And we're like, okay, look, it's like Maine. Can't we go back to Maine? It's time to go back to Maine. Right? So we came back to Maine. And this went on for a bunch of years, and it just got harder to go back to Philadelphia. Why? It was dirty and loud and, all that stuff. We got something called a Rural Residency Grant from Chamber Music America. They don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And so they would take groups and put them out into some rural spot that was very underserved with classical music. So long story short, they agreed to let us come to Damerscott. And that's a 3-year stretch for that grant. And
Wow.
you had to have a granting organization in the town, which turned out to be the school district. And between that collaboration, you have these 3 school years to enhance the community. And we just never went back. We did those 3 years and stayed here.
So to give folks an idea of how long it might take to put together, let's say like a classical quartet, like a Haydn quartet, how many weeks of rehearsal would you say? When would you feel ready to put that on?
Now is way different than then. Now it would be, because we know what we're doing basically. And then we were developing how we're going to work, how we're going to exist. So I wouldn't say you'd need, I would say you need at least 20 to 30 hours on that piece to be able to perform it.
And that's ensemble work. That's just ensemble work. Right?
That's not put it together, rehearse together, 20 to 30 hours.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I mean, we were working 10 and 11 hours a day, 3 rehearsals. I mean, we ate, we rehearsed, we ate, we went for a sail, we rehearsed. That's it.
So I've always been curious, since I'm not a string player myself, how do you guys choose your repertoire? How do you build a program? Where do you start?
Well, it starts out very selfishly, basically. We each have sort of a list of pieces we throw in a big hat, basically, on a table, say. We have this big list of pieces. And then, now we've learned that we kind of have to think in terms of how to make a program that makes sense to put pieces together. You can't just throw any old pieces together.
It's a hard lesson to learn.
Right. We try to make pieces that, okay, will this work with that? And what's the connection? And is it a good way to span time and all that kind of thing? So once we have this big list, we start honing it down to 3 or 4 programs. And then each of those programs, we try our best to come up with some kind of a name that wraps the 3 pieces together. Like, even though we're not playing it now, but Heartbreak Hotel is coming up. Hopefully it's coming up in November with a soprano from Chicago. And those 3 pieces have something to do with lost love and rejection and that kind of thing. So there's some kind of sense to the title that goes with these 3 pieces.
Okay, so the pieces come first, not the theme or the title.
The big giant table full of pieces comes first, yeah. And then cull them down until they make sense together.
Yeah. For me as an audience member or as a listener, kind of watching or listening to a quartet performance, it strikes me almost like dance, where there is a very fluid sense, or at least some forms of dance, where there's a fluid sense of who's leading and who is following or supporting.
Right.
And one of the things that always struck me about your ensemble is that you have such a well-honed sense of one another that you pick up on it like more than instantly. There's this really organic fusion of that, which makes it really great to watch and listen to.
Now that we've been the same 4 people for, I don't know, maybe 11 years, 12 years, we sort of read it very quickly, like what somebody wanted. Of course, there's lots of conversation and we talk about how to determine things and all of that. But there's lots of natural stuff that happens now that couldn't have happened 10 years ago.
So what season are you? This is your 30th season, right?
30th, for Miles and me, it's our 30th season, yeah.
That's an incredible achievement. For those young musicians that are just getting started with their instruments or have aspirations of beginning their own ensemble, what sort of advice or feedback would you give to them? How would you kind of counsel them forward?
Well, let's take it from the ensemble question. And so if you're forming a quartet that you want to become a professional performing existing quartet, I think there are really 2 things you have to be sure of. One is that you have the best players you can find, not somebody who's good enough. You gotta get the best you can get together that agreed to play. 2, if you have any idea that somebody's going to be the leader of that quartet. That doesn't really exist anymore. Everybody has to approach it from the standpoint of, I'm going to give to you as much as I ask you to give to me. And if you don't have that, you don't have a quartet.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody is like, this is how we're going to do it, and it's going to be my way, I suppose you could find people who are willing to do that, but I don't think that adds up to the best formula, to the best sum of 4 parts.
Thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me this evening. I have one final question. Is there a particular composer or piece that has been really sparking your creativity in this time of quarantine, or is there a particular set of desert island pieces, like if you had to pick your favorites?
Yeah. Well, those are 2 separate things.
They are.
So the on my own quarantine thing, and
Mm-hmm.
this is probably true for every musician, every string player anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's always Bach. There's endless discovery in Bach. There's endless reworking. Oh, this could be a little better. Oh, let me try that. Oh, I'll try this way. That never ends, and it's great that way. So that's all self-discovery forever. I forgot about the pieces. You said for the desert island.
Oh, yeah, desert island pieces.
I can never live without Beethoven. I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm stuck somewhere, it's got to be Beethoven.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't. I love it. Mozart. Yeah, I love it. Haydn. Yeah, I love it. But the middle Beethovens and late Beethovens and the earlys. That's my that's my life juice, I guess.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me this evening. I understand that there might also be a musical offering.
Well, we had mentioned, I don't know really what I could place a little something if you want me to.
Oh, certainly. That'd be a great way to
conclude. So I'm going to play, I'm not in love with this piece, but it's a nice piece. It's by Jules Massenet, who wrote an opera. And the Thais is this, well, do you know the opera?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Well, this is one of the violin solos that happens during the opera. Mm-hmm. And it's become a sort of, standard violin. I don't know what you play it for a recital, I suppose, or wherever you'd like to play to
people.
For people just to enjoy something nice. Mm-hmm.
That was lovely. Thank you
Oh, I
so,
had
so
a
much for
little
sharing.
memory slip there. Sorry about that.
It was gorgeous. That
Oh,
was
good.
what a wonderful way to kind of conclude our evening chat. I understand, Dino, that there is some Beethoven that's meant to follow this interview. Do you want to tell our listeners about it?
Sure. It comes from Beethoven's Opus 132 Quartet. The movement is known as the Heiliger Dankgesang, and it has to do with Beethoven's return to health. And he was quite ill, and he had this not a relapse, a repose from being ill, and he was like a breath of fresh air entered his life. And this piece was spawned from that time in his life. And above the second, maybe it's the third movement of the quartet. It says, "In thanks to the Godhead for my return to health." And so he didn't say God, he actually said Godhead, which was interesting. You know, Miles is sure he was from California. So just kidding. But anyway, we're going to have that movement, and it really is for this time as we maybe are starting to return to health. I don't know. You hear everything in the news.
Yeah.
It's appropriate for now, I think. So please enjoy the Heilige Dankgesang from Opus 132 of Beethoven.